We're going to be looking at the last chapter of the book of 1 Samuel and a portion of the first chapter of 2 Samuel. It's been a long time, but we're going to see Saul for our last time in our studies. Saul dies today in the Scriptures. And I want to do this a little differently this morning. The story is intricate in the last chapter, and so I'm going to read that last chapter and a portion of the first chapter of 2 Samuel. That could be a little painful for you, because I don't read as well as someone like Suze. If Suze were reading it, it would be entertaining to you, and you could feel it all happening. But we're going to do our best this morning with my reading of this long passage of Scripture. And then the good news is I'll make 1 point, only 1 point this morning that you'll begin to see from this passage. Before I begin the reading, though, I want you to know that David has, for the last few weeks, been chased by Saul, finally to the point he decides to go down to the land of the Philistines. He's there with a covenant between himself and a king named Achish. And at one point in time, he's called to go fight with all the Philistine kings, not just Achish, but all the Philistine kings. And he's going to fight against the Israelites. And so they make this journey, David and his 600 men, only to arrive at the battle site. And the Philistine kings say, "No, we don't want this. We're afraid David might change his mind in the midst of battle and fight against us." And so David has to make that long journey back to Ziklag, the Philistine city that he now occupies. When he arrives at Ziklag, remember everything that's happened? The Amalekite raiding party has been there. The wives, the children are all gone. The supplies are gone. And now David is pursuing them. And when he finally gets back, he gets this news that we're going to read about this morning. But all the while David has been pursuing the Amalekites, that battle that was going to take place between the Israelites and the Philistines has been ongoing. They're still fighting. And the battle has not gone well for the Israelites. And it most certainly has not gone well for Saul. And so it begins in verse 1 and says this: "Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the Israelites fled before them, and many fell dead on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines were in hot pursuit of Saul and his sons, and they killed his sons Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchi-Shua. The fighting grew worse around Saul. When the archers overtook him, they wounded him critically. And Saul said to his armor-bearer, 'Draw your sword and run me through, or these uncircumcised fellows will come and run me through and abuse me.' But his armor-bearer was terrified and would not do it. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. When the armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his sword and died with him. So Saul and his 3 sons and his armor-bearer and all his men died together that same day. And when the Israelites along the valley and those across the Jordan saw that the Israelite army had fled and that Saul and his sons had died, they abandoned their towns and they fled, and the Philistines came and occupied them. The next day, when the Philistines came to strip the dead, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. They cut off his head, stripped off his armor. They sent messengers through the land of the Philistines to proclaim the news in the temple of their idols and among their people. They put his armor in the temple of the Ashereths. They fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. And when the people of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all their valiant men marched through the night to Bethshan. They took down the bodies of Saul and his sons from the wall of Bethshan and went to Jabesh, where they burned them. They took their bones and buried them under a tamarisk tree at Jabesh, and they fasted for 7 days. After the death of Saul, David returned from striking down the Amalekites and stayed in Ziklag for 2 days. And on the 3rd day, a man arrived from Saul's camp with his clothes torn and dust on his head. And he came to David and he fell to the ground to pay David honor. "Where do you come from?" David asked. He answered, "I have escaped from the Israelite camp." "What happened?" David asked. "Tell me." "The men fled from the battle," he replied. "Many of them fell, died. Saul and his son Jonathan are dead." David said to the young man who brought him the report, How do you know that Saul and his son Jonathan are dead?" "I happened to be on Mount Gilboa," the young man said. "And there was Saul leaning on his spear with the chariots and their drivers in hot pursuit. And when he turned around and saw me, he called out to me and said, 'What can I do?' He asked me, 'Who are you?' 'An Amalekite,' I answered. Then he said to me, 'Stand here by me and kill me. I'm in the throes of death, but I'm still alive.' So I stood beside him and killed him because I knew that after he had fallen, he could not survive. And I took the crown on his head and the band on his arm, and I brought them here to my Lord." Then David and all his men with him took hold of their clothes and tore them. They mourned, wept, fasted till evening for Saul and his son Jonathan, and for the army of the Lord, and for the nation of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. David said to the young man who brought him the report, "Where are you from?" "I'm the son of a foreigner, an Amalekite," he answered. And David asked him, "Why weren't you afraid to lift your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?" Then David called one of his men and said, "Go strike him down." So he struck him down and he died. For David had said to him, "Your blood be on your own head. Your own mouth testified when you said, 'I have killed the Lord's anointed.'" So Saul is dead. And everything that God has chosen to tell us about Saul for now 10 months, this is the last Sunday, the month of October, everything He's chosen to tell us about Saul has been bad. Now, I'm sure that Saul had some good points. Almost everybody in life has good and bad kind of mixed together. I'm sure there was good inside of Saul, but you and I have been taught the other side. For we have seen Saul become a man of pride. We have seen Saul become a man who fails to trust completely in his God. And when you fail to trust in God, disobedience comes easily, and so we have seen Saul become a man of disobedience. We have seen Saul be ruthless, and he has murdered innocent people. We have seen Saul overcome with jealousy, so that jealousy will seem to send him into a rage or into a mental fit from time to time. And mostly we have seen Saul trying to kill David and treating David horribly, so that David and his army have to leave even the land of Israel. That's what we know about Saul. And yet, as I read that long passage about his death, and about when David learns about his death, did anything stand out to you? Did anything kind of jump out of that? The one point I want you to know about this morning is the word respect. And I'm wondering about that word. And this lesson is not easy, at least to apply in my life, and it may not be easy to apply in your life. Because did you see what happens when the young armor bearer sees his king, his master, fall on his own sword? He falls on his sword. It seems to be out of respect and honor for the king. And then when the Philistines take hold of the body of Saul and cut off his head, and take his body and the bodies of his sons back to their city, and they nail them up to a wall. The Israelite men who find out about this, these valiant men, travel all night long. And they take down the bodies, and they properly dispose of the bodies, and they fast for 7 days. Why would they do that? And when the young Amalekite comes to David and delivers the news and says, David, Saul and Jonathan are dead. It's like David says, are you sure what has happened? Tell me what's happened. And when he explains how that they're dead, and by the way, embellishes the story a little bit, what he tells David is not exactly true. He obviously is trying to win favor with David. He was mortally wounded. I went ahead and killed him. That was not true. I brought you the crown. I brought you the armband. But when David hears the news and it becomes clear, he and his men, do you see the reaction? They tear their clothing. They weep and they mourn and they too fast. And then finally, David will look at the Amalekite young man who brought the news and say, by your own mouth, you have stated that you killed Saul. How could you possibly raise your hand against the Lord's anointed? And David had him killed. Everything I read in this is about these people treating Saul with honor and with respect. And I don't think he deserved it. I don't think he himself deserved it. He by himself in his conduct didn't deserve it. And yet there's a reason why they did it. So I want you to think for a moment about this word respect. I don't know for sure how to define it. It is to give honor to those who deserve honor, but be careful with that word deserve. Or maybe I would use for our purpose this morning, just respect may be a civil discourse and civil actions toward other people, especially those in authority. Maybe I can just tone it down to say it's just civil. We have a nation today that has a problem with the word respect. And I'm not even talking about what I see going on in the faraway place from us of Washington, D.C. I will tell you and unabashed tell you that I think Washington is so filled with greed for money and greed for power, that they've lost their bearings on the word respect. But I'm not concerned about that right now. I'm concerned about where we live, in our community, what we do in our lives day by day. Last Thursday, Susan and I drove to Granbury, Texas, and we met a group of elders and their wives and ministers and their spouses at a retreat center, a bed and breakfast retreat center, which we've done for about 9 years with this particular church. I started speaking to all those in my group at 8:30 on Friday morning and ended at 4:30 on Friday. I began the way I always begin. Every year I begin like this. Before we can move forward with what you want to talk about, we have to define reality. You can't make good decisions for tomorrow unless you know what's real today. And so I said, I want you to tell me what life is like, what's real in Midland, Texas. And I want you to tell me what it's like in your work life, and I want you to tell me what's like in your personal lives, and then we'll finally get to what's real and what life is like inside your congregation. One man spoke up. He was a newer elder among the group. I had not met him before. He grew up over here at Fort Cobb. He is the director of an educational service center. Now, I don't think Oklahoma has these, but Texas is broken up geographically into educational service centers. Those service centers may comprise 10, 12, 15, 18 counties, depending on the size. There are 20-something of them across the state of Texas. He said, I'm responsible for supporting all these different school systems in my geographical area. He said, I'll tell you what reality is for us. We have students who no longer recognize any authority of the teacher. And we have students who do not show any kind of respect. You can't imagine how students talk to their teachers. But he said, that's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is our parents, the parents of these young people, how they come and how they talk to teachers and to administrators. And he said, we have a total breakdown of respect for authority in our school systems. But you and I know it goes beyond that. You and I know that it would be difficult today to be a police officer, don't you think? I mean, I had one walk up behind me the other day at a quick trip, not in this city, in a faraway place. I saw him bringing a can of something. I think it's one of those things you drink to stay awake on his job. And I said, put his bill on mine. So I did, and he just stood there for a moment when I turned to walk away and stuck out his hand. I didn't know how about wearing a mask and thinking that your hand was going to work together, but I just shook his hand and I said, you guys have a really tough job, and I'm sorry you have such a tough job. But you realize we have seen police officers standing firmly in a line and not saying a word, not doing anything, and people will come along and call them pigs, and people will come along and spit on them and throw things at them. And you wonder what happens to this word respect. And you go to almost any forum. Maybe it's with your local city council, maybe it's with a mayor, maybe it's with wherever it is with people of authority. And people will come in groups and they will scream and they will yell and they will say things that you're shocked. But I can give you one more than that. Try walking into a church and having a church-wide forum where people are frustrated. And rightfully so, perhaps frustrated. And listen to the way they talk against church leaders. And listen to how they talk against one another. And you think, whatever happened to this word respect? And whatever happened to the attitude that David had in this story? Because there's got to be some way. There's got to be some way that you and I can have a civil tone to one another even when we are in disagreement. What if? What if I don't agree with anything those people are doing above me? What if I don't like their character? It's not just that. Have you ever had this experience? I pull out on the road and I think I've given this person plenty of time. I can get up to speed and I don't get quite up to speed fast enough and they don't like it because they had to slow down. Anybody ever done that? And they pull up beside you and how do they act once in a while? They're waving their arms and they're shouting something and I'm reaching for my, no, I won't say it on mine. I think what's fixing to happen next? It's amazing how we treat each other. And some people don't deserve maybe to be treated so well. Saul didn't deserve it. But they honored him greatly. So I want to read one verse to you. There are several. That teach us to respect our families, our parents. Teach us to respect those who have the rule over us in a local congregation. But this one stood out to me in 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 17. It's a hard verse. It's a hard verse. Peter says, show proper respect for everyone. For everyone. Show proper respect for everyone. Love the family of believers. Fear God. Honor the emperor, or some of your translations will say the king. Now I know for a fact that there were kings or emperors in that day that were horrible. And they were mean, and they were ruthless, and they were murderers. And Peter says, I want you Christians to show respect to them. And I want you to show respect to everyone. To everyone. I have one big question in the end. One big question. Why? Why? When you don't deserve it. When they don't deserve it. Why? And the answer is this. The answer is this. We are treating others with respect because of our reverence for God. We are treating others with respect because of who we are in Christ Jesus. Because God set up these authorities and He put us in certain places. And not every place is good because evil creeps in and Satan corrupts so much. And yet out of reverence, out of respect, out of love for God, we act like we're supposed to act. We act like we're supposed to act. But I forget that a lot of times. And I don't do like I should at times. But that's true for all of us. It's just a reminder. Someone who lived his life in such a wasteful manner. Saul wasted his life. Do you see that? Saul did virtually everything we know about him. Did it wrongly. And yet people in his death treated him with such respect, such honor. You and I are supposed to live like that because we are God's children.